Hello and welcome to another episode of Tradecraft Tuesday. If you're like us, you are surprised that it has already been a month and it's time for Tradecraft Tuesday again. I think this happens to us every single time where it just kind of creeps up on us. But anyway, thanks for showing up. If you're new here, Tradecraft Tuesday is a show that we put on once a month, every second Tuesday. And we jump on here and we try to give some interesting knowledge about what's going on with attackers. We usually have a little bit of news. We try to throw stuff in there about what attackers are doing, what's new. And then we try to break down some techniques that attackers can use so that you can better understand what you're trying to defend against, where your networks could be vulnerable, and kind of understand the risks that you're basically having to deal with. All right, do we want to get into the news?
Well, I mean, we can get in the news, but maybe to get everybody pumped, we've been doing the MITRE ATT&CK framework for the last couple of months, and this happens to be for our tactic this month. It's persistence. So obviously, we know a thing or two about some persistence. Obviously not going to, blow any major minds today, but obviously show some really cool techniques and tricks up our sleeves, cover from the basics to some of the more advanced. And then obviously looking to get feedback of what people like. So please make sure to comment it up, chat with us. I obviously do a lot of this on the fly, but yeah, let's get on to the news before we get into the fun stuff.
Cool. The Blue Mockingbird hacking group is exploiting some new vulnerabilities in IIS to drop Monero miners.
So, and I know, John, you and your team has been seeing way more crypto coin mining than, essentially, usually it's ransomware in the last couple of weeks. Any idea if it's, I mean, obviously IIS is super prevalent. I know that being able to walk an exploit back or hey, from crypto coin miner back to an actual vuln, is that the case? Are you seeing more? What's the story on this, Johnny?
We've actually seen this several times, and that's what we saw it a bunch of times. It was really odd to see Monero again. And then one of the guys on the team, Matt, found this article that Red Canary had published about it. And so it's an exploit for a third-party Telerik UI and Ajax library. And that has the vulnerability. And then these attackers, they're dropping, like I said, Monero with it. We've seen a lot more lately. I wonder if some of that has to do with the attackers are taking advantage of the fact that people are not in the office. I remember the first week we were stuck at home back in early March. Over the weekend, a customer got hit with, I don't remember what crypto jacking software it was, but went to all their computers, and it's like, why drop that? Why not drop ransomware? But if you've been running for a longer time, I was on potentially more money.
I was on a panel earlier today where they were saying also seeing an uptick in ransomware, and obviously you take, not ransomware, sorry, coin mining, and the ability to pay was brought up. And that's a thing right now, like especially with PPP loans, small businesses. I don't think it's from the passion of the hacker's heart, like, oh, I'll just mine your coins instead of extort you. It's probably just like, hey, look, everybody is strapped right now. I think we were looking at economies where people are having trouble paying rent. It's probably just like, oh, I can guarantee a paycheck from mining. It might not be as sexy as the Bitcoin, but I'll take it.
Right. Yeah. It's definitely not as high valued as Bitcoin. Right now, Coinbase is reporting Monero price is about $68, whereas Bitcoin's like 9,700. But I'm assuming that they're trying to mine Monero instead of Bitcoin, probably because it's easier to mine on general CPUs, and I guess they're hoping that the value of it goes up and gets at some point to 9,000, right? So interesting.
It's there. I dropped both the links, both to the Red Canary blog and the Bleeping Computer blog. They both do a great job of highlighting what this is. But obviously, IIS is always scary. We had a handful of people direct message already saying, oh gosh, don't tell me IIS. Yes, sadly, IIS since probably about May. So that's a whole month that this has been going down, just as a heads up. But that's not where it stopped with some of the kind of rough security news. The one that we've both been very active in here talking about Ragnarlocker, which was known for initially killing off like a whole bunch of the services to RMMs to hinder your ability to remotely recover. and as well as the Maze ransomware team, who's probably most notable for kind of the worst type of thought leader, where they were some of the first that not only ransomed your data, but stole your data. And so when they were holding you for ransom, it wasn't just your data, it was your reputation. So like, who cares if you can get it from backup, because they're about to put your data on the dark web for sale. Or if you really tick them off, they'll just give it out for free. So that's one of those things that's happening. And I guess where the bad news is, where Maze and Ragnarlocker look like they're doing some joint ventures, some teaming up, right? Is that the level?
Yeah, I guess I guess the way it works is Maze has, they were kind of one of the first to, like you said, start with this data leakage, where they would not only ransom your machines, but they would like steal all your files first. So even if you decided not to pay the ransom, then they could say, well, if you still don't pay us, we're going to dump them on the, on the dark web and let everybody have your files. But it looks like they've turned this into a platform and are providing it to other people. And so Ragnarlocker is like, hey, that's cool, we'll join in on that too. And so it looks like some of these like ransomware gangs are kind of teaming up to join onto this new thing of extortion over data leakage. So it's an interesting development. It's definitely not good for anybody, because previously with ransomware, what you had to be concerned with is, can I restore my backups? Now it's not only that, but it's what data did they steal and is about to become publicly available.
Yep. So I just got a message in regards to like, hey, where can I learn more information about Maze team dumping stolen data? Specifically here, I'll warn everyone in advance, the link that I'm sharing here in chat. And obviously, if you're watching this afterwards, it'll be in the description. But it's the direct link to where Maze puts out their press releases on the companies they target and dumping the data. Your browser will warn you like, hey, this website is known to scam you and things like that. It's hackers, like just straight up, but useful to see for everybody that wants to take a peek in there. And obviously, as we see more with this, especially with actors that are known to target MSPs and some of the small business market, we'll continue to share that as well.
Yep.
So Chris, I know, it's every month we do a lot of webinars together. You were recently on one with Tom Lawrence, and his webinars are always solid because they're technical, they're non-pitchy. But with your webinar that you did with him, it was specifically in regards to some trusted websites doing some less than trusted activity. Do you want to explain what was going on before I share some of the links?
Yep. So I had seen this in some of the news, and then there was some chat about it on Twitter and Hacker News and stuff. And people were basically saying like, hey, there's a bunch of these websites, and not even necessarily sketchy websites, like well-known websites, who are using WebSockets to scan your computer for open ports. And which is pretty interesting, because basically WebSockets allow the browser and allow a page that's rendered in your browser to asynchronously communicate with other servers, and that's how you get a lot of this real-time update type of stuff that you'll see in a lot of these newer websites. But people had figured out a way to use this to like scan for all these ports. And so Tom was looking into it, and he said, hey, can you come on and join on as like a technical person? And we were looking at, in this case, specifically eBay. So eBay was using some JavaScript to scan for a bunch of these open ports, weird things like TeamViewer, Amy Admin, a lot of like remote control stuff. And at the time, we didn't know why. We didn't know what the reason was. eBay hadn't put out a press release or anything to say what it was doing. Our assumption was that it had to do with like basically figuring out fraud and like fraud detection and bots and stuff like that. It did finally come out that this is some tool from a company called LexisNexis. I don't know if you ever heard of them. They basically provide like this massive database with all kinds of data in it, where people in the press and stuff like that, they subscribe to it, and they can like go and search and figure out all the data that LexisNexis knows about Kyle Hanselman. And so I guess they had made some sort of product that was like doing this, and so it was integrated into a whole bunch of really popular websites like eBay and a bunch of others. And so it was interesting, but the news that I saw here was that uBlock Origin, which is a plugin, it definitely works on Firefox. Chrome was making some changes that suggested uBlock Origin wouldn't work there anymore, so I'm not sure if it does work there. But I guess they had updated some of their block lists, and so they were blocking these scripts that were actually doing the scanning. it's kind of fragile in that it's not actually blocking the scan itself, but they were blocking the specific where the script was being loaded from. So I guess there was a little bit of benefit there. But, you know, it's one of those interesting things. If you're interested in that or our discussion to that, it looks like Kyle put the link in there. And you can go check out the video on Tom Lawrence's YouTube channel.
Oh man, so let's get it going, right? We've got, obviously, it's always doom and gloom, but it's always exciting too to hear what the cat and mouse, and persistence is definitely the definition of cat and mouse. So without further ado, I'm going to do just a little bit of screen sharing here to introduce the topic, and then you know, we're going to put our own spin on this with a handful of live demonstrations today. You know, it's one thing to read these things or talk about how hackers are doing it. It's a whole other thing when you can actually learn from it. So we're going to do a lot of VM sharing back and forth. But what's interesting about this is persistence is literally just how the adversary is trying to maintain their foothold. I'm reading this to you because it's just such a simple, good explanation. But it really, at the end of it, it's the crux of hackers are lazy or efficient, depending on what side of the coin you're looking at. So they want to find a way to stay in your network once they gain access. This is something that John, Chris, and I used to do, was long-term access. This is something that we know a whole lot about. And often it comes down to the economics of, you know, I fished Chris today. I don't want to have to fish him tomorrow again. When I get in once, I want to maintain that access. Or when he shuts off that laptop and goes to set up at a coffee shop, as long as he has internet access, I want to maintain that access back and forth. And this goes back to as long as there's been malware. Persistent malware, we're talking about dates to like your old 70s, 80s style applications. I didn't find, you know, obviously there was some malware written in the, you know, 60s, 70s era, but it wasn't quite the same level of where persistent and remote access was there. But it dates back, so there's legit needs for it. Guys, do you want to cover, obviously, you know, there's a whole bunch in here in this tactic of different ways, obviously different operating systems. Nothing is about this is Windows specific, although we've chose today to show a lot of these Windows techniques because it is very easy to understand if you've never looked at it. So yeah. I encourage, we'll obviously share the links here for this tactic that we're talking about, but we're talking about all kinds of things, built-in features into the operating system, like how it downloads updates, all kinds of things like the COM object models or component object models here are specifically features within Windows that date back all the way to like Windows 95, NT 4, 3.1 days. And then other topics that we've talked about before, like search order hijacking. You know, hey, why live on one VM when you can just implant the hypervisor and then infect all VMs? Yep. Once again, it's somebody not wanting to lose their access in case somebody reverts a VM. So that whole idea is usually built on convenience. So gents, I'm going to stop sharing, and obviously we've got a little bit of a perspective on this, that there are real reasons, right? I talked about the lazy convenience, who wants to refish over and over, but there's kind of other reasons too, right? Like on protecting equities.
Yep, absolutely. There was a, I can't remember the name of the vulnerability, but there was a vulnerability a couple of years ago that affected like Windows domain controllers, and somebody analyzed a sample and they found that the sample only ran in memory. There was no persistence to it. But the reason they had caught it was because it had crashed a few machines. And so the hard part there was like, they didn't want to drop persistence because that could potentially lead to them being detected. But they had this really spectacular 0-day vulnerability for Windows domain controllers, you know, that probably was really hard to develop, really hard to discover, cost them a lot of money, and ultimately their choice to not use persistence ended up with that vulnerability being burned.
So if you think about it, like in the top tier of nation state actors, you only get so many 0 days. You know, it's not something that you just churn out like persistence techniques, right? There's a lot of ways to do that. And hackers are constantly finding new, just like 0 days. But the difference is once you get your 0-day caught, it no longer is, you know, that silver bullet, right? It's not the golden gun from Bond that enables you to get in or, you know, take down any victim. So hackers will tend to use a 0-day maybe once, right? And then they will, with that access, maintain the long-term access so they don't ever have to lose it. And this is something even into like crimeware, even into like the capture the flag games has become part of a strategy of in a network where we would joke that the person in charge of maintaining long-term access was called the shell Sherpa, somebody maintaining this access and capture the flag. So anyways, silliness behind there. But I just want to reiterate, there's a real importance to why you'd want to have persistence. With that said, I think probably the easiest way we could talk about it is there's two different forms. A lot of times we're familiar with auto starting. You know, this is when the computer boots up or somebody logs in, it automatically starts. But there's a whole other flavor of this, which is kind of like, you know, the booby traps, right? You know, only when activated or only when tripped do they start running. And there's just different ways to go about it. Some are more repeatable. Like if you need to guarantee as soon as the computer reboots, you're probably going to want to use a specific persistence for that. However, if you're just like, look, I know one day you're going to open your browser, so maybe I target when your browser opens, I'm going to do it. It's not as predictable, but you still get the job done with some of those booby traps. So gents, what do you guys think about me doing just a very simple like malware demo, show the tool Autoruns to get this started? Does that sound like a good way?
Yeah, you can just show Autoruns first to kind of show what it does and then show how it now detects the stuff.
Yeah, I am now. So let's run into this. So for those of you that don't know, there's a tool suite out there called Autoruns. It's from the sysinternal suite, right? Sysinternals.com. It's Microsoft owned nowadays. And what's cool about this tool is within your Windows environment, and there is a Mac now version of this as well, not by sysinternals, right? Is it Knock Knock? Is that what the tool is called by Objective-C?
Yes.
Anyways, where I'm going with this is
I'll drop a link to it in the chat.
Yeah, there's a way to be able to identify anything that's going to automatically run. And these are sometimes called auto starting entry points or ASEPs. You could imagine that on this computer here, I've turned off all the filters except hide empty locations. But even when I turn that filter off, you're just looking at your needle in the haystack. There's hundreds of things. On an average Windows 10 computer, there's anywhere between 700 to 1,000 automatically running programs. Some of them that are signed by Microsoft, some that are third-party tools. Let me see if I can hide some of these and show the audience of what this looks like. So I'm going to try to hide all Microsoft entries and see now we can see like, oh, look, there's some run keys, like a way to automatically make these start up. And there's different flavors that they've given tabs. So we're going to share with you a handful of these different flavors or specifically called techniques that fall under the persistence tactic. So what I'm going to do here real quick is now that I have Autoruns to demonstrate how this malware works, the first thing I'm going to do is more or less take a snapshot. I'm going to save the current state. So what I'll do is I'll just call this baseline and I'll save this to my desktop because we'll refer to this later when I do some nasty malware. So one of the malware families we wanted to share with everybody today is this is saving. This is one that was targeting some folks in the UK, but really nothing about it is specific to the UK other than that was the payload. And so I'm going to go ahead and open up the zip file. We take a look, right? We're already looking at what could be shady in here. These are JPEGs, but the PDF file that actually is type shortcut that already starts to raise some red flags, right? Make this a little larger for everyone. And it gets even shadier when you start looking at the PDF file that's actually a shortcut with a docx file extension. So maybe not the most elegant capability, but what's cool here is if we take a look at this machine, right? I'm going to run this malware and I've already played with this malware and I know it's going to do some funny stuff. For instance, it drops some files in the temp directory. So I'll open that just for us to see real quick. But as we run this, even not as administrative privileges, we notice it drops a JavaScript file, it creates a shortcut, it self-deleted itself, and then opened up a PDF, first utility gas bill. I have no clue what the phishing lure was here, but what's interesting is you thought you were opening a PDF. Clearly my icon changed. It did open a PDF. What it did is it ran itself, copied itself, the shortcut then copied it, put the actual PDF here and then opened the PDF. Congratulations. And for the most part, you would say, oh, that's great. I wasn't expecting, this is not me, this is somebody else's. You delete your PDF file, you close it, you go about your business. That's what you would do. But we know there's something more going on here. From a persistence perspective, I'm just going to give this computer a refresh. And what's happened is this computer has indeed established persistence. And it actually uses a technique called scheduled tasks. So I'm going to go ahead and let this run. And it's currently surveying all the different ways that we can maintain persistence on this computer. And theoretically, I should be able to find a scheduled task in here that doesn't look like the others. So I say this as the demo gods like curse me. And maybe if I have to, I'll go and actually, rerun some of the malware. No, there it is. It just took a little bit of time. And so what it does is Autoruns does its best to find applications. For instance, this is claiming to be NVIDIA, but it's not digitally signed, although it does claim it's the driver manufacturer for video cards and 3D graphics. And I can tell you, since I've already done the legwork here, that this is not real. This is indeed malware. And so a great example of this is, since we were able to run this, I'm able to actually say, hey, I want to compare my current state of this computer against my original baseline. And this is a real unique way to see, like, I just ran that file, voila, I have one new thing. That doesn't mean this is malicious. This could be a legitimate scheduled task. But in this case, this hacker has automatically made this malware do a couple things. So let's take a look to see what this is doing real quick. And then we'll move on to some of the other techniques that are outside of scheduled tasks. What's really neat about scheduled tasks is you can define multiple what they call triggers, or multiple ways to affect them. And so in this case, the hacker made it, as soon as I ran this malware, it ran the payload, which the payload here is just player.exe. That is clearly not the NVIDIA player. The other one, though, is anytime this user logs on, it will automatically run as that user. And the reason that it did it at logon here is because I did not run it with elevated privileges. If I would have ran it with admin privileges, even though I'm an administrator, I didn't, it would have made it run on boot up. So anybody who logs in automatically gets affected. What's really cool about this is, if anybody knows about Windows scheduled tasks or what you could do to edit some of these things, there are a lot of really powerful capabilities in these scheduled tasks. For instance, one of them, of the triggers that you can add if we wanted to add a new one, is some really creative things. Like, for instance, you could make, and if this locks up on me, I'll just give the verbal, but you could do crazy stuff like maybe only when this computer gets plugged into power, or only when it starts up, or only on a schedule, like when it's every full moon or something silly like that. So you can imagine, only when this user locks or unlocks the workstation, you can get very targeted with the way that you collect somebody's data. That way, if you do have some type of sexy next generation product that's looking for your behavior, you can minimize the risk of when you run. So I hope that was useful for everybody to see that kind of high level introductory. And we've already got a boatload of questions and chat. So
one of the questions was, how did you know I was going to drop files in the temp directory?
So I have done the legwork here to already reverse engineer this sample, but just in case for those, since this is Tradecraft Tuesday and we do all kinds of nonsense, there's no reason I have to stay on script. If I look at this shortcut file, and I know this is silly, but you know what? Good old Notepad will tell you a whole lot. I'm going to bring in the LNK file, which is just the shortcut. And this is the file format for the shortcut that says what it's going to do. But if we take a look under the hood here, it's doing all kinds of additional command.exe runs. It then copies the LNK file. It tells me it's doing something with temp. What it turns out it was doing is a move. And if we scroll through this, there's all kinds of these, there are actually words here that are reversed. So if we look, you're like, what in the world is this? Well, this is just the word version backwards, right? And there's all kinds of these where it's trying to do some basic obfuscation. And at the very end of this, if I recall correctly, this is actually how it was going in the code. In the shortcut, it would go and register itself a scheduled task called media, update media task. So I have already done a little bit of that analysis, but the truth is I looked into this shortcut and I've already reverse engineered the sample. So I kind of cheated to make it a little bit easier for everybody today. So guys, obviously scheduled task is one way that a hacker would make their payload automatically run. And some of the people are asking questions like, is there an automated way to get a baseline from Autoruns on a regular basis? There's a lot of automation you could do with these things. Our team has contributed to the code base and the features of Autoruns for the last, 5-10 years or so, given features to the team there. People have made PowerShell versions of Autoruns, but effectively that's actually what Huntress's inspiration of looking for persistence was, Autoruns. So I won't go into any of that sales pitch, but John, we'll place some links on where you can find PowerShell versions of Autoruns out there in case you wanted to try to bake your own. Other questions about malware samples, huge thanks for everybody saying the zoo. I look at Twitter, there's all kinds of places, but we'll get into that for some of the questions at the end. So guys, we did the world's quickest demonstration there of persistence. We ran malware, we got persistence, but this isn't the only way to make things pop up, right? Far from it.
Yep. So there's a couple of other techniques that are spelled out under the persistence tactic. Just to go into some here, the next one that we got queued up for you is Logon Scripts. So if you've ever been a member of a network where you were part of, a Windows domain, right? It's super common that when you first log in, you'll see command pop up and it'll run some stuff, and usually it'll say like mounting the Z drive, and that'll mount your network shares and that kind of stuff. Those are scripts that your admins add to the domain controller, and then they put all kinds of stuff in there for stuff they want to set up every time your computer starts and every time you log in to mount your specific drives or whatever.
Lateral movement, obviously useful if you can get to a DC, you can spread it that way.
Yep. Yeah. If you can modify those scripts, whether they're stored on the DC directly or on the file store, as soon as everybody logs in, you run that on everybody, right? And we've seen that kind of stuff. Another one one of the downsides there is that only works on Windows computers that are on domains. What if they're not on domain? Well, what we can use is this other registry key that I'll go ahead and show you how that works now. And let me screen share. Let's screen share that one. All right, let me get this stuff out of the way. All right, cool. So this is a registry key called user init mpr logon script. Okay, and what this is going to do is it basically tells Windows like, hey, whenever a user logs on, I want you to run this script. So very simple demonstration. We can open regedit.exe to allow us to edit the registry manually. And this is HKey classes root. So where we want to go to is HKey current user and environment. And you can see over here, there's already some values in the registry, but there is no user init mpr logon script. But that's real easy. We can just add a new one. We'll add a string value. mpr logon script. Okay. And then we'll set the value to say like, you know what? I always want to run notepad.exe when I log in because that's where I do all my work, right? So we set that up. Everybody knows Notepad's the best. What are you talking about? And then, so now to demonstrate this, all I got to do is go ahead and log off. So we'll log off of my VM here. And then we'll log back in. And if everything works, we should see Notepad automatically started. So there it is. It is started. For whatever reason, it's down here in the taskbar. But there you go, right? I got Notepad started. I got also other stuff popping up. But that was as simple as that. So very easy. And I guess one of the things that we can show you here is if we run Autoruns, just like Kyle was showing, run it, we'll let it do some of its scan. And if you look at Autoruns, there's the Everything tab, which just contains tons of stuff. But for this case, let's filter this down a little bit. Let's go to Logon. And there's still a whole bunch of stuff in Logon. But we can see right here, it might be hard to see, I don't know, it's maybe not zoomed in, but you can see right here under HKey current user environment, user init mpr logon script, that it does show that Notepad is there. If I double click it, it will take me to the registry key. You can see it's there. Autoruns is updated fairly often. Here's one from like, let's see, I don't know, a year or two ago. This is 13.80, and I can show you this exact same thing. Does not, in fact, find notepad.exe. So they're constantly updating and constantly adding stuff. But with Microsoft and as many of these things that they have added over the, like, what, 30, 35 years that they've been building, you know, Windows, they don't even have all of them in Autoruns. So, you know, it's a best effort.
Yeah, I'd reiterate the opposite side of that. Think about, you know, those logon scripts has been in Windows for 10 plus years, but only in the last year has it been added to Autoruns. So what about those 9 other years that things went undetected? So even Microsoft, at their capabilities and their resources, you know, have to keep up with this stuff. So it happens. So once again, obviously different needs for persistence, right? You don't want to get caught. So maybe my scheduled task, I can get more surgical, but there's a lot of attention on scheduled tasks. Using something like those logon scripts that do have legitimate features, well, maybe that allows me to do, like I said, lateral movement or just be a little bit more stealthy. And you could see even the tool like Autoruns was giving more reputation to stuff that was signed, especially by Microsoft. And it turns out a lot of hackers will tend to launch applications that are signed by Microsoft and then call the eventual malware because, you know, if you're looking at it, you're like, oh, it's calling a legitimate Microsoft file. Sometimes the filters hide them for you automatically, or sometimes it evades behavior-based detection because you're running a good program first that then later calls something a little bit more shady. So,
Yep. Yep. So I guess I sounded disgusted at the Logon Scripts. We were chatting actually before we started recording, and I was saying, like, I can't believe, you know, it's 2020, and like we're still, like, these are still things that are taking people down. Like, it's just crazy. But you know, at the same time, it's hard. Not so much that case, but if you look at other things like Linux startup scripts, so a lot of stuff in Linux is built off of a startup script, right? Whether you're using System V and you're using Init D scripts, or whether you're using System D, the newer version, right? And that is still just going to run a lot of scripts. How do you know that every line in that script is supposed to be in there, right? If it's a 300-line script with all kinds of bash stuff and if-else cases and switches, it's super easy for an attacker to hide some stuff in there, and for you to not realize it, you know? So, and those things don't, you know, they can't be signed as easily as, like, say, a Windows binary can be signed.
so John, you know, you and I are always talking about it doesn't always have to be the sexiest thing to work. And one of the examples that you and I were sharing with, and I can't remember what the malware family, maybe it was CACbot or something like that. We're talking about just like the feature of backdooring shortcuts. So far, everything we've shared, everybody, has been this auto starting capability. But what about laying, like, you know, laying some landmines down, waiting for somebody to click on that shortcut or startup menu? Do you have any examples? And I know you shared some with me earlier, but I'd love, since you and your team see so much of this, can you share, like, in real world where you're seeing some of these? Because I'm going to prepare a demonstration about backdooring shortcuts.
Oh, sure. So I thought I had seen a backdoored shortcut, but I did see a backdoored run key. CACbot will take a legitimate thing. The one example I found last night was OneDrive's shortcut startup or run key value that was automatic. So you log in and the run keys automatically execute. CACbot modified it so that it put the CACbot executable first. That would run CACbot, and then it would call OneDrive, so you wouldn't notice that it was running. Very similar to, I think, what you're about to show.
Yeah, so I'm pretty much ready now, and obviously the reason of John giving a heads up about some of these things, it's funny how the different actors will even borrow each other's tradecraft. Like, it's almost like good inspiration, right? I've heard marketing people say, you know, good marketing people create, great marketing people steal, and it turns out that's the same truth that happens within the hacking world, or at least the cyber criminal world, where they borrow or acquire each other's inspiration. So we started out.
If it works for one, they all kind of jump on.
Yep. So Chris, I've got one here that from an ESET article that you shared, but I'm going to do the introduction in regards to, you know, these kind of landmines, or, you know, talk about shortcut modification first, so that everybody's following the attack matrix that's on here, and then we'll go from there. Does that make sense?
Cool.
Okay. So getting back on track real quick, right? We still have that, you know, persistence is a tactic, and one of the techniques under that tactic is shortcut modification. So obviously we know shortcuts or symbolic links are a way to reference other things. It's, you know, a shortcut in life. It'll take you there faster. Adversaries love to use shortcuts for persistence. You know, it's a history that goes back as long as malware. It's all kinds of creative things. And what's neat is creative doesn't have to be complex. And so I'll show an example today where hackers started out with some pretty basic stuff, and where even this team kind of leveled that up with some of our own tradecraft this morning to make this extra interesting. So notice, you know, some of these examples that I shared earlier, like Logon Scripts, had a couple examples of hackers using this in the wild. Notice with shortcut modification, you just keep scrolling and scroll, you know. And
I was going to point that out as well. Like most of the examples you'll see of, like, people using it in the wild on MITRE ATT&CK pages have like 3 or 4. This one had like 20.
Yeah, it just keeps going. And there's tons that aren't even referenced, since MITRE, you know, attack is, you know, it's not the latest and greatest. We see some of these are 2019, but the stuff we're seeing today doesn't immediately go in there. So just as an example, a lot of them try to use indirection or a way to masquerade to look like a legitimate program. So a great example of this, if we take a step back, would be, shortcuts, right? And so I'm going to go share some of our notes here real quick. But I love to look at shortcuts. I love to talk about how we can abuse things with them and do, shenanigans like that. So I'm going to jump to this ESET article. And if we take a look, these hackers with, for their persistence that ESET, they called it I can't take it, this is Gazer. And they said, look, we're just going to make for each shortcut, it would modify existing shortcuts to execute the malware through command.exe. So more or less command.exe was what was truly running. And then it would start program A, and then they'd use the command line capability of, double ampersands to actually start another program and run application B. So remember, like earlier when we ran that PDF file, the PDF or the shortcut copied itself elsewhere, dropped the PDF and spawned it. That's to give you the user experience that for the victim, oh, I have PDF, I double clicked the PDF file. Yes, a PDF file opened. You don't want to just change a shortcut. Like imagine if you just changed a shortcut and no longer did Chrome launch. Like that would be a pretty odd or pretty funky demonstration there. And you'd question. But I always look like, for instance, this is that same Server 2019 box I had earlier, right? When I click the shortcut for Internet Explorer opens up. So I don't even remember. Does anybody remember where this thing sits? I know it's somewhere under app data, but we'll take a look and see what the demo gods do here. But I'm going to just search for Internet Explorer, and thank goodness my search capabilities looking. Recent items. What else do we got?
Startup, something or other.
Yeah, I can never quite remember where program. Oh, it's following the shortcut. How ironic that the indirection that we were just talking about, the hackers love. And I just got schooled by it real quick. So I'll start digging, right? I know that it's under Microsoft. I believe it's under Internet Explorer and maybe Quick Launch. Yeah. So here's some of them. Obviously, this is not the same pane as the quick launch pane that you could add for different links. There's one extra in here, and if I can't find the darn thing, we'll just skip it. But where I'm going with that is, all right, so we got Internet Explorer. What if I add another shortcut down there? We'll do it interactively like this. Like, no offense, if I go through here, unpin this taskbar, or unpin that shortcut, and now I add another one, does anybody notice the difference?
Nope. No,
hell no. You're going to have no idea what's going on there. But if we run this program, we can see automatically Internet Explorer launch, but I made calc run as well. So let's take a look at this shortcut of what I've done, right? And we see this is using the same technique that we saw earlier, which was I'm making command.exe run here. I'm using the argument /c. And we use start. And the reason for this is if you don't use start here beforehand to run this application, it'll actually open up Internet Explorer first. And then only when Internet Explorer is closed will it spawn the other application. But you can make start run immediately. And this will allow you to open up Internet Explorer. And you use start again, and it will allow you to open your separate application like calc here. And the reason for that is maybe calc is actually like saved browser scraper, or so it'll go after your saved credentials. So that's super useful. But what
was
about
that first start in there? It was like start star or something.
Oh yeah, I added all kinds of stuff to make it, to handle some indirection. All right, it was me not wanting to be basic like we saw in that example, and then I added an extra shady version here. So okay. I'm curious. Well, for those that are chatting, this is where I want some user input today. So I've got an extra shady version. So I'm going to run it, and we're going to watch what it does, and then we're going to look and we're going to hypothesize on how this might have happened. So I run extra shady version, same behavior, calc, and the legit application. And once again, I could have added it to the toolbar just as easy as that other version. Yet when I go take a look at the properties, I see command.exe, and that's all I see. So I'm going to challenge everybody here, and then I'm going to let the team here dissect what's going on. But does anybody have an idea what's actually happening here with the shortcut, or why we can't see what it is? I know it's that awkward silence, right? Especially when you're on a web show.
Oh, somebody got it.
Oh, what'd they say? And let's
spaces. We got some extra spaces.
So Limey in here, Sir Limesalot, is 100% right.
And
so
Derek.
Yeah, referencing other shortcut from Shannon, which is a rock star that I'm stoked to have him on here as well. What's really cool about this, nice job, Derek, as well. So within Windows, especially the old school days of Windows, it was all about only ASCII characters only. And with ASCII characters, you effectively, any file path was limited to 260 characters. That was max path length. But what's really neat is as Microsoft started adding support for like Unicode characters and foreign character sets, where some of these were much more verbose because Unicode characters are obviously, take the width of 2 characters instead of just one, ASCII character. They expanded max path to be 4096 bytes, right? Or just over 4,000, 4K. So what's funny is Microsoft tends to not update all the places where they add support. So what we did is we abused that field, knowing that that field was only going to show 260 characters. And I added command.exe, which had to be there. There's no escaping that. However, I added spaces. In this case, I added actually new lines and added so many of them until it pushed it past that 296 characters. And then my malicious argument started, thus not allowing you to see what was going on. So you can imagine how this evasion, it just, as soon as somebody clicks that shortcut, if that's what they do every single day, they probably had no idea that that's what's going on. And even if you looked at it, especially as a system administrator that just like typically installs like your tier 1 technicians even that are on help desk, there's no idea, right? So yeah, definitely extra shady, and I hope you appreciated that. So we're more than halfway through our episode today, and I know we could go and talk about this stuff till we're blue in the face. Does somebody want to grab another topic of persistence that we could pick up? I know IFEO debuggers is one that we've talked about on and on, but we've never really demonstrated it. John, we've been talking over you today. You want to do some demonstrations?
Sure, I can do a demonstration if you want to talk, and I can set up the screen sharing.
Yeah, so what's cool about some of the MITRE ATT&CK capabilities is you don't get just one, tactic that has many techniques. Sometimes a technique applies or multiple techniques apply to the same thing. So John, in this case, is going to be demonstrating one that's T1183, which is called image file execution options. And so we'll make sure that that goes into chat. The other one that he's going to do is talking about abusing the accessibilities. So, Carl that just asked that question, I just pasted a link to MITRE in there for attack.mitre.org, and the rest of the URL is posted in chat for these two. So John's opening up the registry, and I'm going to let him take it from here to show how he's going to combine 2 techniques to form persistence.
So the image file execution options, they're a feature of days ago, or days of yore rather, for developers to be able to, specifically in this case, we're using the debugger option. So it allows developers to debug their programs interactively. I'm in the wrong key. I've done this. I can't type and talk at the same time.
Yeah,
It's so hard. It's so hard.
Windows NT.
I'm like scrolling through stuff and trying to talk, and I realize I like slow down my talking a lot
Yeah.
as I'm trying to think too.
These are the image file execution options, and there's lots of things that are automatically or already pre-configured in Windows to use them. Some of them are security features, like Windows script has some disable exception chain validation. But one of the features of these image file execution options, as I mentioned, is the debugger. So if I create a new key and you give it any executable, so anytime service host is run, Windows will look in these image file execution options and see if there's anything configured for it. So I'm going to set up one for the accessibility feature magnify.exe, and then I'm going to create a new string value of debugger. And like I said, this was created so developers could run a debugger when their application ran. So if you were debugging my exe and I wanted a debugger to run if it crashed or when I'm testing it out, I could put in the path to WinDebug or some other debugger here. But attackers can exploit this and run other things. So what'll actually happen is when magnify.exe is run, command.exe will instead run. So if I lock my screen here, I can go to the accessibility options. And if this works, it'll open up command.exe. And not only did it open command.exe, I'm logged in, but it's not running as me, it's running as system. So imagine an attacker, you have remote desktop server on or enabled, and attackers can get access to it. But instead of logging in, they use this backdoor. There's no logon event. You might see a connection, but other than that, that's all you see. So they have full access from here from the command prompt.
Yeah, so I've seen these time and time again where for persistence, they might not even use the shell to get her done. They might quite literally just paste like net user add user, add the user to the local administrative group because it's running a system, and it's a great way that they can interactively log back into your system. So yeah, huge yikes. As was mentioned in chat, there is plenty of tools to look for some of these like newly created tasks. What's really cool about Windows Defender is Windows Defender added some capabilities that will actually look for you targeting the accessibility tools. And so for this demonstration earlier, we were getting our butts kicked by Windows Defender as we were trying to show this demonstration off, and ended up just turning the sucker off so we could make this nice and easy. So there is benefits of running some of these fully patched versions of your operating system that gets these new cool security features like that. So obviously IFEO debuggers or image file execution option debuggers are scary. They're dangerous. They do have useful features. This has backward support from forever ago. I can only just reiterate that this is something that we see on the not quite daily, but definitely weekly basis for our MSP partners. Oftentimes, what is it, John? Instead of making like command.exe, it's usually like a batch file, right?
It's a batch script that says the command prompt has been disabled by an administrator, and then it asks for a password.
Yeah.
And the password's actually hard coded into the batch script. So if somebody accidentally gets it, they think, oh, this is no big deal, I'll just ignore it. But
yeah, and by putting a password, they keep other hackers from I think I've seen some with some profanity, like "get off my back door," F-bomb.
Yeah. We came across one the other day. It was interesting. It was actually a service on the box that created the IFEO backdoor every time the service started, which was interesting. I had never seen that before. So.
Oh man, I'm laughing at some of the chat. The chat is epic today about isn't that a feature for password recovery? No. Oh gosh.
I have actually used it for that.
Really?
If you work really fast. I did it the other day. I lost access to one of the laptops I was re-imaging. If you work, even with Windows Defender enabled, if you can get your user account created fast enough before Windows Defender catches that it's there, you're good. So
Good old-fashioned race condition.
Seconds. Yep.
Oh, that's cool. So John, huge thanks. Obviously, IFEO is one of those. It's just really fun, right? It's eye-opening. And we'd encourage anybody on this, like whether you're technical and you're teaching others in your office or, obviously customers, these are the things they want to see, right? When you make it seem like hackers have to be super elite to do all this, they think, oh, I'm never going to get that type of attention. But when you show basic stuff like this that just works, it opens eyes. So, all right, we're down to 12 minutes, and I know there's another one here, John, that you've been dying to share. It turns out, I think Silence is probably the one that's done the most documentation on it, but something that love all about, which was, parking spaces or the idea of open parking spaces. So I know you're screen sharing or were screen sharing, John. You want to go ahead and talk a little bit about obviously what traditional services are. And so you could talk about how that's on persistence and segue this into the parking space or placeholder services.
Let me switch sharing. And so new services, where did it go?
It's not like there's only a bajillion of them for you to find on there.
So this is one of those, another persistence mechanism, creating a service. So instead of the typical ones, the user run keys or user login scripts, if you create your backdoor or your malware in such a way that it runs as a service, so when the system reboots, it runs for all users rather than a specific user. You can see it gets used quite a bit. The ones we see a lot of are MITRE, and if it's on here, they don't have TrickBot, but TrickBot uses a service as well. But this is a kind of a play on the service. So in Windows, there's actually, Cylance calls them parking spaces. They're services that are configured to automatically start, but they don't actually are not configured to by default. Let me switch back to my screen here. So if we go to HKey, local machine, software, Microsoft, Windows, NT, current version, service host. So these are all, you've probably seen a service host run, and it runs service host space -K and then the name of a service group. And these are all the services that are configured within that group. So I'm going to specifically target the net services. What's interesting here is if we scroll down, there's a lot of services in here. And some of these are just placeholders. So for example, the fast user switching capability or compatibility. If you remember in Windows XP, they had the fast user switching to switch between user accounts. You could, instead of logging off. Well, so this is a holdover from that. So if I go into the, if I go into the system, current control set, services, if I go to, there's no fast user switching compatibility service configured here. So I'm going to take advantage of that, and hopefully this will work. Tried it a bunch of times. I'm going to create a service. It's already configured for me. A shared service, the image path, I'll show it to you after it's done, but it's actually service host, and it points to that service group. And the service DLL is a DLL that I created to test this. So it's going into fast user switching compatibility and parameters. I'm going to run my batch script to do this. There's nothing special about it. It just copies my DLL into system32 and then imports my registry settings. So I'm going to run that. See, it worked.
The demo gods.
Yep, there it goes. So now if I go back here and I refresh this, there's my service entry. I called it hijack parking service. We'll remember that. There's service host, and the parameters points to my DLL. So now I got to reboot the box. This is the only downside.
Should I give you like some waiting music here? While we're waiting for the box to reboot, some of the questions that brought up in chat were really good. They were asking about the difference. Like some of these persistence mechanisms you can do without privileges. Like I can, you know, if I compromise a user that doesn't have admin rights, I can change their shortcuts. I can't change the shortcuts of other user profiles because I can't see the data, but I can change theirs. Just like how Chris's also, the one he demonstrated was in the HKey current user. I could maintain persistence that way. But the technique John is currently showing is using, you know, creating services that can run at system level. So you do have to have high integrity admin level permissions or system to be able to do that. And so, for instance, malware is often coded to handle both cases. It will do a test to say, do I have privileges? If I have privileges, it'll use one or an array of, you know, admin level techniques. Usually they're sexier, a little bit harder to find, or a little bit more dangerous. The opposite side of that is if I don't have privileges, let's use one of these more traditional and basic so I could, you know, work my way up, escalate privileges, try to gather the data or try to move laterally eventually, but first have to gain privilege access. So obviously this one is admin related here.
So I open up the services manager. I call it hijack parking space. Oh, and look, it's running already. I can start and stop it. And This one actually has a debug view, so we can actually see it working in the background. Capture all. There's my service. So if I stop it, you'll see it stop and restart. But the really cool thing about this is because the service already existed, there's no service creation event.
Right.
Yeah,
There's
so
nothing in the event log to catch.
And I think that's a big thing that, like, you can't understate that enough, is a lot of the security applications and solutions that are built on top of SIM solutions are going to be looking for new service created, you know, all those kind of things, service modification. But like that didn't necessarily happen here. So I think that's interesting. I can't say off the top of my head which ones will and will not catch that, but it's interesting nonetheless.
Yep, I didn't, I tested this. I created it, like I said, with the service DLL, but it doesn't have to be a service host service host with a service DLL. You can run a standalone executable and it will run the same way. It doesn't matter.
So John, there's a really good question that asked of like, oh crap, should we go ahead and remove those placeholders in SVC host? And so the biggest question is, you know, there's a good chance that if you remove those and you added nothing extra to your computer, you're probably not going to break anything because clearly it doesn't need it immediately. But there's also a chance that you know, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 technician later goes to add a new service for some weird customer response. And now all of a sudden your service is not starting in the right order or doesn't start at all initially. And so you get your system into a weird, funky state. So our personal preference is to monitor, but we're clearly biased because that's our job to monitor for persistence. So like that, you know, take that with the tiniest grain of salt. But system stability and productivity, I always try to put those, you know, you got to remember those come first. Security is still to enable productivity, not to hinder. So, you know, why doesn't Microsoft remove these things? Microsoft hasn't removed features from Windows 3.1 out of Windows 10. They're just starting to go down this direction where, like, you know, you get the core version of server, you get the headless version, and then you get the, what's the nano server is the one that they're just starting to remove. So Microsoft of 2019 would probably tell you we'll die before we do this. Now that Microsoft, you know, is buying GitHub and starting to write their own hardened Linux kernel for Azure, I think we're starting to get a little bit more risky version of Microsoft. So maybe we'll see it in 5-10 years, but for now, they're here to stay.
So Todd Riebling asks if he should use Windows Defender so that he can obviously block some of these things, and is that going to complicate troubleshooting with other antivirus tools?
Ooh, this is controversial for sure. Johnny, you want to stop screen sharing so they can see our ugly mugs real quick? And we'll, I guess we can go around the room. So the question is, should I enable Windows Defender? So Windows Defender will definitely conflict with some products, or I guess it's vice versa. Since Windows Defender is built in, its other products will conflict with Windows Defender. With that said, we have done a whole lot of work recently to try to figure out, is Windows Defender good enough, right? Is it actually truly top notch? And Defender in 2020 is not, you know, your grandfather's security essential version, right? Or my security essential version. With that said, it's getting to be to the point that it's very common to hear people considering replacing. We are right in the middle of this, trying to figure out, like, you know, does it look good enough? I personally think that it's pretty solid. I'm not saying ditch your existing antivirus, because that's, there's a business cases that you need to think about this. Support, maybe you're getting extra features, but Windows Defender is starting to really get aggressive on some of these techniques where Microsoft has missed them in the past or can't get rid of them for backwards compatibility, where Windows Defender is starting to complement some of those gaps. So I guess that's my on the fence crappy answer.
Yep. Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, for a long time, I've been recommending people to use Windows Defender. Usually it was in the case of like, hey, you know, my mom's computer, my grandma's computer, my home computer, I don't really want to pay for antivirus. You know, what should I use? And my answer was always like Windows Defender. Like it's good enough. Like it's not going to catch everything, but it's good enough. And so I would say that it's probably better than good enough now, seeing as how Windows Defender ATP is built on top of Windows Defender. It's like this special extension that runs as part of Windows Defender. If Microsoft has gone all in that far to say like this is good enough to run this product that we're going to charge extra for, and we're going to build a whole security thing on top of, probably good enough for most things.
Yeah, and I see the chat too is, you know, full of people saying like, look, ATP, the full-fledged AV replacement has been pretty solid. Obviously, plenty of jokes about Microsoft's pricing and licensing schemes too. So kudos for that. It was E5 licensing, right, until recently, now that you could buy it for a couple bucks for ATP. Yeah, John, what's your thoughts on the non-ATP built-in Defender? I mean, you see this more than not.
Yeah, I like it. We actually, like for these demos, we had to turn it off, especially for the back door. But there are a lot of times when we're testing malware, some of the samples that we get, we have to disable Defender because Defender immediately catches it right off the bat that other things have missed. So it's just
And nothing's
seems
perfect,
as good
but-
as anything as anybody else.
So yeah, that's huge. So great question there, Todd. Thanks for that. Guys, I mean, we're right at the top of the hour. We want to do a little bit of outro, maybe give a chance for some feedback. Obviously, we want to hear from you, you know, comment, chat, whatever it is. Of there's more persistence we didn't cover. We weren't 100% sure how far we would go through with this. So if you liked it, let us know. The live demos were cool. Let us know.
Yeah, if you have questions or comments, you can reach us at tradecrafttuesday@huntress.com. We used to say, here's all the places you can come see us that we're going to be at, but in the new normal, the new weird that we live in, it's all virtual. So we got some links here to a couple of things that we got coming up. We're going to do a 2-day virtual summit with LionGuard called Techcation. We're going to do a 2-day MSP security learning event called Cisco Security Tapas. And we're hosting our first ever event that we have put on ourselves and not just been a part of, which is called the MSP Growth Hack. And that's going to be a 2-day sales and marketing training event. So I'll drop the links in chat, but you wanted to say something, Kyle?
I was just sharing that one of the hacking demonstrations, if those of you that like that image file execution option debugger persistence that we showed earlier, my hacking demonstration at LionGuard will actually use that as part of the whole scenario. So you can see how to give a demonstration like that in real life.
Cool.
Cool. So huge thanks everyone for joining us here in June. I hope everybody's staying safe regardless of where you are. Let us know if you know what you're interested to see future topics. Huge thanks again to everybody who egged us on to go down the route of MITRE ATT&CK, and we'll see you next month.
Yep. Have a good one.